Life can surprise us in the most unexpected ways. I'm Barren, so why buy me? A cowboy's dollar turned into a miracle tells a story of hope, kindness, and miracles in the Wild West. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. Clara stood at the edge of the dusty corral, her heart pounding as she watched the line of cowboys and ranchers move past. The hot Texas sun beat down on her shoulders, and the wind carried the scent of hay and leather, but none of it could drown out the ache in her chest. She had traveled for days on a rickety wagon, leaving behind a small town that offered little more than whispers and pity. She was barren, and in this harsh land, that word was worse than any insult. Yet she still hoped somehow for a chance at a new beginning. The trader's eyes swept over her like they were inspecting cattle rather than a human being. Clara's stomach twisted with humiliation, but she lifted her chin and met their gaze. "Why would anyone buy me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound brave. The laughter that followed cut through her like a knife. They whispered, smirked, and shook their heads, judging her worth by a cruel standard. She could feel their eyes boring into her, assessing her like she was nothing more than property to be bartered or discarded. Clara's hands shook as she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had never imagined that her journey would be like this. Her mind wandered to the life she had left behind, the small, dusty house that had once felt like a home, the neighbors' sympathetic glances, the empty rooms that reminded her constantly of what she lacked. She had thought moving west would be a fresh start, a chance to be seen for who she was rather than what she could produce. Instead, the world had greeted her with ridicule and rejection. Then she heard a quiet voice above the hum of mocking laughter. "I'll give you $1. Clara turned sharply to see a man leaning casually against a post, his boots dusty, his hat low over his eyes. There was a calmness to him, a quiet strength that made him stand apart from the others. He didn't look at her with pity, nor did he smirk. Instead, his eyes were steady, and she felt as though he truly saw her. The dollar he offered seemed almost absurd, but in that moment it carried weight she couldn't yet understand. $1? Clara asked, incredulous. Her voice wavered between disbelief and a faint hope she had not felt in years. "That's all?" The man nodded without hesitation. "That's all I can offer. But I'll tell you this, I don't see what you think you lack. Sometimes the world gives more than we expect." There was something in his words, something steady and unwavering that stirred a flicker of courage inside her. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if perhaps there was a chance for her after all. The other ranchers and traders exchanged amused glances, shaking their heads at what they considered foolishness. Yet Clara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a fragile sense of relief. Against her better judgment, she accepted the dollar. It was small, almost meaningless to most people, but it represented something far greater: recognition, dignity, and a spark of hope. She didn't know it then, but this single act of faith would soon ripple through her life in ways she could not imagine. Samuel, the cowboy who had offered the dollar, did not simply walk away. He introduced her to the routines of ranch life, showing her how to care for the animals, mend fences, and manage the land. He never spoke of her barrenness, never mentioned what she lacked. Instead, he focused on her strengths, her willingness to work, and her resilience. Slowly, day by day, Clara began to feel a sense of purpose. The harsh wind, the relentless sun, and the demanding chores no longer seemed unbearable. She felt seen, respected, and slowly alive. Evenings at the ranch carried their own magic. Clara would sit by the fire, exhausted from the day's work, and watch the sun dip behind the distant hills. Samuel would occasionally join her, speaking in quiet tones about life, the land, and the promise of tomorrow. He shared stories of his own hardships and dreams, and Clara found herself laughing, sometimes for the first time in years. The dollar he had given her had grown into something far richer, a partnership built on trust, kindness, and the quiet understanding that they were both seeking a life worth living. yet doubts lingered in Clara's mind. Could a barren woman ever truly find happiness in a place where fertility and family were prized above all else? Could she belong here with someone who had already shown her kindness? Each night she wrestled with these questions, her heart heavy with fear. But Samuel never faltered in his support. His faith in her, simple as it seemed, became a lifeline. She began to understand that perhaps the measure of a person's worth was not in what they could produce, but in the courage and goodness they carried within. By the time the first hints of autumn painted the plains gold, Clara had changed. She walked taller, spoke with confidence, and felt a resilience that had once seemed impossible. The ranch no longer felt like a temporary refuge but a home. The dollar that had seemed so insignificant now felt like the seed of a miracle, a turning point in her life. Samuel's belief in her had awakened something dormant, something powerful. For the first time in years, Clara dared to hope that her life could be full, meaningful, and even joyful. And so, standing at the edge of the corral one evening, Clara looked out over the land she had come to love. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the laughter, the humiliation, the moments of quiet courage, and the single dollar that had changed everything. She realized that sometimes the smallest gestures hold the greatest power. Samuel had offered her more than money. He had offered belief, possibility, and a chance to create a life she had thought forever out of reach. In the dusty West, against all odds, hope had taken root. Clara woke early one crisp morning, the golden light of the rising sun spilling across the ranch. The air smelled of dew and hay, and for the first time in weeks, she felt an excitement she hadn't known in years. Samuel approached, his usual calm expression softened by a quiet smile. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small packet of seeds. Clara frowned, unsure of what to make of it. Yet there was a warmth in his gaze that made her heart lift. Somehow, she trusted him completely, even without knowing why. She knelt in the fertile soil near the riverbank, Samuel kneeling beside her, showing her the proper way to plant each seed. His hands, strong and weathered, guided hers gently. The act was simple, yet Clara felt a profound sense of purpose. Every seed seemed to carry promise, a symbol of growth and life. As she pressed the earth around them, she imagined the sprouts rising, green and resilient. Samuel's quiet encouragement made her feel capable, important, and for the first time in a long while, alive in a way she had thought impossible. Days turned into weeks, and Clara tended to the small plot faithfully. Each morning, she marveled at the tiny shoots breaking through the soil, reaching toward the sun. The miracle of life unfolding before her eyes stirred a deep, long-buried hope within her. She realized that Samuel had given her more than a chance to work. He had given her a symbol of renewal, of possibility. The barren woman, who had arrived at his ranch full of shame, now felt a growing connection to the world around her, to the land, and most importantly, to herself. As the crops flourished, so too did Clara's relationship with Samuel. He would join her in the evenings, sharing stories of his youth, his struggles, and his dreams for the ranch. They laughed together over minor mishaps and celebrated small victories with a warmth that made the hard work worthwhile. Samuel never pressured her, never demanded anything but her willingness to live fully. His kindness, steady and unwavering, built a foundation of trust and affection that Clara had never experienced before. Slowly, she began to see that happiness was not about what she lacked, but about what she nurtured. Then one day, Clara noticed changes within herself. The morning sickness, the fatigue, and the growing tenderness in her body were signs she had long thought impossible. She ran to Samuel, breathless and trembling. I think I'm pregnant," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Samuel's face lit up with a mixture of awe and joy. He gently took her hands in his eyes reflecting the same hope and belief he had shown since the moment he gave her that single dollar. Together they laughed and cried, overwhelmed by the miracle of life growing inside her. The ranchers who had once laughed at Clara now watched with astonishment as she walked with a gentle glow of new life. The woman they had dismissed, the one considered barren and without worth, was now the bearer of a miracle. Clara felt a sense of pride and belonging she had never imagined. Samuel stood by her side through it all, a partner and protector, showing her that love and faith could transform despair into joy. The dollar that had seemed so insignificant had blossomed into a life-changing act of belief. Clara began preparing for the arrival of her child with the same care and dedication she had shown to the ranch. She mended blankets, stitched small clothes, and set up a modest cradle near their home. Each task filled her with a sense of purpose and anticipation. Samuel would often watch her with quiet admiration, offering guidance and gentle reassurance. Together, they created a home filled with warmth, hope, and laughter. Clara realized that the barren life she had once mourned had been replaced by a life rich in love and possibility. As the seasons changed, Clara's belly grew, and so did her confidence. She walked through the fields, with her hands resting gently on her stomach, feeling the tiny movements of life within her. Samuel would sometimes join her, holding her close as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. The ranch, once a place of hard labor and isolation, had become a sanctuary of miracles, resilience, and love. Clara understood now that her journey of hardship had led her to a life she could never have imagined on her own. Finally, the day came when Clara gave birth. The small cabin was filled with the cries of a newborn, the scent of hay and warmth blending together in a comforting embrace. Samuel held the child gently, his eyes shining with wonder and gratitude. Clara looked at them both, overwhelmed with emotion. She had come to this land barren and alone, but she left it surrounded by love and new beginnings. The miracle she had dared to hope for had arrived, carried on the quiet faith of a man who saw her worth. In the months that followed, Clara nurtured her child with devotion, and Samuel stood beside her as an unwavering partner. The ranch thrived, and so did their family, a testament to the power of belief, kindness, and resilience. Clara often thought back to the single dollar that had started it all, realizing that its value had never been in the money itself, but in the faith and hope it represented. Her life had been transformed, and she knew that miracles often come from the smallest gestures at the right time, with the right heart. As Clara watched her child play in the sunlit fields, Samuel nearby, she felt a profound gratitude. The barren woman who had once asked, "Why buy me?" now understood the answer. She had been bought, not for what she could give, but for the life she deserved to live, the love she deserved to receive, and the miracle she had longed for. In the vast, wild expanse of the American West, Clara discovered that hope, faith, and kindness could turn despair into joy, and a single dollar could indeed spark a lifetime of miracles.